How is the vicegerent's call to follow him evidence of his legitimacy? The established foundation of divine religion is the vicegerency of God on his earth by divine appointment, and every era has an appointed vicegerent of God on his earth. This vicegerent is recognized by way of divine text and knowledge, and all creation is instructed to obey him, that is, applying God's sovereignty. How is the creation instructed to obey him? In his book Ideology of Islam, Sayyid Ahmed al-Hassan explains that it is done by communicating to the religiously capable people to obey God's vicegerent on his earth. It can be communicated through God's vicegerent himself when he seeks to establish God's sovereignty, visions directly from God and his messengers to a religiously capable person, or a previous direct or indirect vicegerent. The question here is, how can calling people to obedience, that is, the call to implement God's sovereignty, be evidence that this person is truly the vicegerent of God? Sayyid Ahmed al-Hassan clarifies this. He says, "The earth can never be void of guidance and truth. If there is a raised banner calling for God's sovereignty, then there is guidance and truth. Therefore, the call to the sovereignty of God, especially if the caller to truth in his time is unique in doing so alone, is evidence of his legitimacy for those seeking to know the truth. It supports and is connected to the previous evidence from divine texts, increasing the believer's certainty in the truth." We also hear the slogan, "the sovereignty of God," from some groups. They use the slogan to mean the call to apply the law of God as conveyed in the divine texts. But for them, it has nothing to do with the vicegerent of God. So, what is the true meaning of the sovereignty of God? Sayyid Ahmed al-Hassan says in the book Ideology of Islam, "The meaning of the sovereignty of God is not only at the level of legislation, but also at the level of implementation of the laws. However, it is impossible to talk about God's sovereignty by only considering legislation without implementation. Legislation is ongoing, so there must be an implementer connected to God to deliver new rulings of new and emerging matters." Does this mean that the vicegerent of God must actively rule to achieve this system of God's sovereignty? Sayyid Ahmed al-Hassan says, "It is not necessary for the vicegerent of God to directly rule, but it is necessary for him to have control over the system of governance, especially over blood matters, such as decisions related to war and peace or death penalties. Therefore, we know that the caller to God's sovereignty in every era is the vicegerent of God, and him being the only one to raise this banner clearly identifies him as it adds to the principal evidence, which is the divine text. The group that believes in God's sovereignty, including the vicegerent appointed and mentioned in a divine text, is the group of salvation and God's chosen people. Nevertheless, there are famous narrations that identify the saved group as the one that follows the path of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, and his companions. What does this hadith mean, and how does it relate to the sovereignty of God? We will learn about this in the next episode, so stay tuned.